The whispering secret. She was not an evil girl. She told herself that over and over again, clinging to the thought like a drowning man grasping for driftwood. She was young, desperate, a girl lost in the vast, uncharted wilderness of her own shame, with nowhere to turn and no one to save her. And of course, there was the secret. It was a living thing now, pulsating beneath her skin, coiling around her ribs like a parasite feeding on her silence. It had once been a mere mistake, a foolish miscalculation in the throes of youth, but over time it had transformed into something else, something darker, something that breathed. She should have known better. He had never loved her, not truly. She had been intoxicated by him, 3 years older, an enigma who existed outside the rigid monotony of classrooms and curfews. He was her first taste of danger, of whispered conversations in dark corners, and fingers grazing against her wrist in secret places. Perhaps that was what had drawn her in more than anything else, not the meaningless gifts of silver necklaces or chocolates hidden in his pockets, but the illusion of stepping beyond girlhood into something grander, something forbidden. She had envied those couples, the ones who walked through the streets with hands entwined, whispering promises meant only for each other. She had craved the affection, the warmth of belonging to someone, of being someone's world. She had thought he saw her that way, the same way she saw him. She had been wrong. She had been nothing more than a passing amusement to him, a fleeting distraction, something he could discard when it no longer pleased him. And when the first signs began to show, she tried to deny them. The missed cycles, the aching in her chest, the way her body suddenly no longer felt like her own. At first she convinced herself it was a mistake, a sickness, something that would pass. Then it didn't. And the truth became impossible to ignore. She met him in the courtyard that summer afternoon, beneath the scorching weight of the sun. Her hands trembled as she spoke, fingers curling into her sleeves like a child seeking comfort. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "I think I'm not my problem." He didn't even let her finish. His words cut through her like ice, cold and final. Just get rid of it, like everyone else does. She flinched as if he had struck her. She wanted to scream at him, to make him understand that this wasn't just some inconvenience to be discarded like a broken toy. That it was a part of her, a life waiting to bloom beneath her ribs. That she had dreamed of being a mother since childhood, had imagined small hands clutching hers, soft coos in the dead of night. But the words never came, because she loved him. And so she did as she always had. She swallowed the pain, locked it deep inside where no one could see, and carried her secret alone. She wore baggy sweaters that swallowed her frame, blaming the weight she gained on stress and sickness. She withdrew from friends, from family, offering half-hearted excuses and empty smiles. No one questioned her, and for that, she was grateful. The longer they left her alone, the more time she had to figure out what to do. She spent sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, her mind unraveling as it searched for answers that would not come. And then one night, the answer came for her. It was the pain that woke her. Sharp, searing, unbearable. It carved through her like a knife, folding her in half. She gasped, nails clawing at the bathroom sink as something shifted inside her, something wrong. A sound followed, a sickening wet slide, and then a thud. Soft, almost gentle. Her breath hitched. She stared down, her stomach twisting into something unspeakable. It lay there, nestled against the cold porcelain of the toilet. Small, twisted, wrong. The bathroom felt suddenly too small, the walls pressing in, suffocating. The air was thick with the metallic sting of blood clinging to her skin, her breath, her soul. And then something moved. Not the thing on the porcelain, no, something else, something unseen. It whispered beneath her skin, slithering into the marrow of her bones, curling around the edges of her mind. She wanted to run, but she couldn't, because it was still there, staring at her, mocking her. She had never been an evil girl, but evil no longer mattered, because now there was only this. Only the secret that would never die. The secret that would whisper to her in the dark, curl against her in the dead of night, breathe down her neck when she was alone. The secret that would never let her go. And so, neither would she. The locker. She did not even realize what had happened until she stood up and saw it. A dark, near gelatinous red, slithering down her trembling thighs in thick, pulsing rivulets. Her breath came shallow, ragged, her fingers gripping the bathroom counter as the world twisted around her. She forced herself to look down, past the blood, past the sickening warmth pooling at her feet. And there it lay, a thing. Her mind refused to recognize it. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. It had simply fallen from her, as though it had never belonged there in the first place. She knew in some detached clinical part of her brain that it had been alive. She had memorized the cycle of the womb from countless biology lessons, read about it in textbooks filled with neat diagrams and sterile explanations. But nothing had prepared her for this. It was small, fragile, nearly whole. Perhaps 16 inches long, its tiny fingers curled inward like a sleeping infant's, miniature nails already formed. There was a light dusting of hair on its bruised, swollen head, and its skin was pale, veined, slick with afterbirth. And its face was a grotesque blend of her own and his. Its paper-thin eyelids fluttered ever so slightly, and in that moment she felt it staring at her, seeing her, judging her. Then, "Sweetheart, come down for breakfast." Her mother's voice rang from downstairs, cutting through the thick, suffocating silence. Panic surged through her. No one can see. No one can ever know. With shaking hands, she grabbed a towel, scooping up the tiny, lifeless body and stuffing it into her school bag. She barely registered the way it curled unnaturally, its limbs folding inward like a discarded doll. The blood smeared onto the fabric, warm and wet, but there was no time to care. She scrubbed the floor, the toilet, the sink, erased every drop, every sign of what had happened. Her legs trembled as she pulled on her skirt, tugging her sweater over her hunched shoulders. And then, as though nothing had happened, she walked out the door. The weight of her sin grew heavier with each step. The walk to the station felt endless. She could feel them watching, the strangers. They knew. They could see through her bag, through her skin, into the filthy, ugly thing she had done. They saw the damp, growing stain on the fabric. They heard the whispers that curled around the edges of her mind, voices she tried to silence. Her hands clutched the bag tighter. She clenched her thighs together and kept walking. By the time she reached the train station, the morning crowd was beginning to stir, a sleepy, sluggish swarm of people moving through the vast, empty corridors. This was where she would do it. Her hands fumbled in her pocket, her fingers trembling as they wrapped around the cold metal key. The lockers. She moved quickly, lowering herself to where she knew no one could see. The lock clicked open, the metal door creaking slightly as she eased it open. For a moment she hesitated. Her fingers brushed against the damp flesh inside her bag. Then, before she could allow herself to think, she pulled it out. It slid into the cold darkness of the locker with a sickening ease. And then, the eyes. For the briefest moment, those dull brown eyes opened. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe it was just her own guilt, twisting the memory into something unbearable. But in that moment, it looked at her, and she swore. She swore. It saw. It saw what she had done. It accused her. A strangled sound built in her throat, but she forced it down. She had no choice. She was doing what needed to be done. Her lips moved before she even realized she was speaking. "I'll come back for you," she whispered. "A lie. I'll get him to change his mind. We'll have a family, a nice house, good jobs, toys. You'll be loved. You'll be happy. Don't worry, someone will find you here. They'll take care of you." Another lie. The metal door clanged shut, sealing it away. And that was the end of it, or so she thought. On the train ride to school, she found him in the hallways, his posture slouched, his hands stuffed into his pockets. The familiar electric thrill of seeing him no longer came. Instead, she felt nothing. Her voice was breathless, filled with relief. "It's gone," she told him. She didn't have the courage to say how. He barely even looked at her. His response was a mere grunt, a shrug, a dismissive, "Good." That was all. 1 week later, he left her. No explanation, no final words. Just gone. And so was she. Because from that day forward, no matter where she went, no matter how many years passed, the cold never left her. She felt it in her bones, in her dreams, in the hushed spaces between breaths. The weight of the locker door, the sound of it slamming shut, the silent, fluttering movement behind those half-formed eyelids. Sometimes in the dead of night, she still heard the whispers, still saw the flicker of brown eyes, watching, waiting. And she knew it had never left that locker. It had never left her, and it never would. The lock clicked. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness. And then, the smell hit her first. Not the rancid stench of decay she had expected, not the putrid scent of something rotting away in forgotten silence, but something else, something cold, something damp, like the air before a storm. The locker was empty. Her breath stuttered. No, that wasn't possible. She had put it there. She had sealed it away. Her hands moved instinctively, patting the steel walls, the floor, the tiny corners of space where something, anything should have been. But there was nothing. No tiny twisted body, no traces of blood, no evidence that it had ever been there at all. And yet, the cold coiled around her fingers, wrapping tight, seeping into her skin, her bones, her lungs, and from somewhere, everywhere, a whisper. Faint, breathless. Her throat locked. The key tumbled from her fingers, clattering against the floor as she stumbled back, her pulse roaring in her ears. No! She turned and ran. She never looked back. But she should have, because the locker door, though left open when she fled, was now closed. Got married, had a child, a little girl with her eyes and his smile, and for a while she believed she had escaped it. The past was a shadow, distant and unspoken. The locker, the whisper, the cold, just remnants of a nightmare she had long since left behind. Until the night her daughter woke up screaming. She rushed into the room, heart pounding, expecting a fever, a bad dream, something ordinary. But the girl sat upright in bed, tiny fists clutching the blankets, her face pale beneath the soft glow of the nightlight. Tears streaked her cheeks as she whispered, voice trembling, "Mama, there's a baby in my closet!" She was fine, just tired. She stepped onto the train, one hand resting on the curve of her belly, feeling the gentle flutter of life within. A reminder of how different things were now, how much had changed. And then she saw him. Sitting just a few rows ahead, slouched in his seat the way he always had, headphones in, staring blankly out the window. Her breath caught in her throat. It had been years, a lifetime ago. He looked older but unchanged. The same sharp jawline, the same indifferent slouch, the same air of someone who never cared enough to hold on to anything. For a moment she thought he might turn, might see her, might recognize her. But he never did. He never even noticed she was there, and somehow that hurt more than anything. She turned away, pressing a hand to her stomach, grounding herself in the life she had now. It didn't matter. He didn't matter. And yet, as the train lurched forward, the cold slithered back into her bones. A whisper, a weight, a presence she had spent years trying to forget. She closed her eyes, and from somewhere deep in her memory, locked away in metal and time, the sound of a baby's breath, waiting. The boy didn't answer. He didn't even move. Just stood there, head still slightly bowed, those dark, unblinking eyes staring up at her from beneath heavy lashes. Her fingers twitched at her sides. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. She swallowed, forcing a gentle smile. "Where are your parents?" Silence. Her heartbeat quickened. The hallway suddenly felt too empty, too quiet. She glanced around, searching for someone, anyone who might be looking for him. But the station bustled on in the distance, unaware, uncaring. And then, a sound, small, wet, a whisper of breath, a shift of something inhumanly still. And the boy, he grinned. Lips peeling back slowly, too slowly, like flesh being stretched over bone. Something deep in her gut twisted violently. Her stomach lurched, her hands flew to her belly, and then the boy spoke. His voice was small, hollow, echoing. "You said you'd come back for me." Cậu bé không nhúc nhích, không chớp mắt. Ánh mắt cậu mở to, khóa chặt vào cô. Trong một khoảnh khắc cô nghĩ rằng có lẽ cậu bị điếc. Cô nuốt khan. "Mẹ con đâu?" Im lặng. Cậu bé nhìn chằm chằm, đôi môi hơi hé mở. Và rồi, cô đã bỏ rơi cháu. Những lời nói nhỏ bé chỉ hơn một tiếng thì thầm, nhưng chúng vang vọng, xé toạc cô như một lưỡi dao khắc sâu vào tận tủy xương. Mặt đất nghiêng đi dưới chân cô. Không. Tim cô đập dữ dội vào lồng ngực, hơi thở hóa băng trong cổ họng. Nó không có thật, không thể có thật. Cô chớp mắt, lùi lại, và cậu bé biến mất. Nhà ga trở lại bình thường. Âm thanh, hơi ấm, những con người. Giọng chồng cô vẫn vang lên qua điện thoại, thứ cô vẫn đang nắm chặt trong đôi tay run rẩy gọi tên cô. Cô không đáp lại, cô không thể cử động. Bởi vì dù cậu bé đã biến mất, cái lạnh thì không. Nó bám chặt vào da cô, thấm sâu vào tận xương tủy. Nó theo cô về nhà. Và trong đêm khuya tĩnh mịch, khi cô nhắm mắt lại, cô vẫn có thể nghe thấy giọng nói ấy, vẫn có thể nhìn thấy đôi mắt không chớp đó. Chờ đợi. dõi theo. Và cô biết, nó chưa bao giờ rời khỏi cái tủ đó. Nó chưa bao giờ rời khỏi cô, và nó sẽ không bao giờ rời đi. Here's the English version of your text. She had no evil in her heart. That's what she told herself. She was young, desperate, afraid. The weight of shame pressed heavy against her chest, suffocating. She had no one to turn to, no safe place to run. And so, she did what she had to. And as the years passed, it became exactly that, a secret, one that festered beneath her skin like something rotting. She had been foolish to think he loved her. To him, she was nothing more than a passing amusement. A girl barely on the cusp of adulthood, naive enough to mistake his indifference for love. He had given her gifts between classes, cheap trinkets, chocolates, jewellery, things she once displayed proudly to her peers, proof that someone wanted her. She envied the couples she saw on the streets, in the halls, on the glowing screens of romance films. She wanted that. She needed that. And she thought he was the answer. So when she realized she was late, when the sickness took hold and her stomach began to swell, she told herself he would understand, that he would take responsibility, that he would stay. Instead, he stared at her, face blank, voice cold. Not my problem, just get rid of it. Each word was a blade, slicing through her ribs. She wanted to believe she could keep it, that it would be okay. But she loved him too much to displease him, so she kept the secret. She hid beneath baggy clothes and muttered excuses. No one noticed, no one cared. And then one night, alone in the bathroom, it happened. A wet, visceral squelch, a sound that would never leave her ears. She gasped, her fingers curling into the sink as a sharp, unbearable pain twisted through her. Then, a thud, gentle, almost soft, like an eggshell cracking against porcelain. And when she looked down, it was there. Let me know if you need any refinements.